Now, so far, we have a flat button on the left that encloses a dice image, and we've got a flat button on the right that encloses a dice image. And when we click on the left dice, we get left button got pressed. When we click on the right dice, we get right button got pressed because our on pressed listener is being triggered. So our button is constantly listening to see if somebody will click on it, or in an app, namely tap on it. And when it happens, it will do whatever we tell it to do inside the on pressed listener, or inside these curly braces. So far, so good. Now, the next problem, though, is that we need to link that action of clicking on a button to the image actually changing. And we got some of the way there by updating our image. Instead of getting the image file name just based on whatever we typed, we're now getting the image file name from a variable called left dice number. And that's for the left dice here. Now, we've created a variable, and based on what we learned in the last lesson about Dart variables, we now know that we probably want to change that to the specific data type that we're going to be storing in that variable. And in this case, if it's going to be the dice numbers from 1 to 6, then it's probably best to store it as an integer data type. So now this line creates a new variable called left dice number, which can only store integer data types, and we're currently setting it to 5. Now this line of code creates our variable, and we probably don't want to create it every time our dice page gets rebuilt. So we probably want to move it out of this build method here. And we probably only want to create it once, the first time when our dice page gets created. And every subsequent time, say when somebody taps on a button or when we hot reload, we can update the left dice number instead. So if we wanted it to update here, we can simply write left dice number now equals to 2. And now when I hit save and hot reload happens, this side will change to 2. So we're separating out the part where we create the variable and parts when we need to change the variable. Now notice that as soon as I've placed my left dice number into my stateless widget, I have a warning here, and it tells me that this class inherits from a class marked as immutable and therefore should be immutable. Now, what does all of that mean in English? Well, here, in order to create this dice page with the center and the row and the buttons and the images, we've used a stateless widget to do that. And so far, all that we've been using are stateless widgets. So as you can imagine, if there are stateless widgets, there's probably stateful widgets. And the difference between the two is that the state of the stateless widgets are not really meant to change. So if you create a row, it's always going to be a row. If you create a center, it's always going to have something in the center. If you create an image, which you need to change and update, it's best to create that inside a stateful widget. Now, what exactly is this thing that we keep referring to, the state of the app? Well, thinking back to when I was growing up, my mom always told me that my room was in such a state. And it might be a helpful analogy to show you the state basically just refers to the way that things are. So let's say if this is our room and we decide to move our plant pot from the coffee table to this footstool, then we've changed the state of the room. The room is no longer the same way as it used to be. And this is what we're trying to do to our app. We're trying to change the image that's being displayed. And to do that, we need to update the state. Now, there are certain places where you might not want to ever change the state. If your app is always going to have a top app bar, then the state of that app bar is not going to change. And to continue our analogy of room states, there are certain places where the state of the room or the layout of the room is not really meant to change. For example, a museum where everything is kind of meant to stay exactly where they're placed. You're only meant to look at things and not touch anything. And the state of the room is meant to stay consistent. The point being, if you are creating a user interface where the state of the widget isn't going to change, then you would use a stateless widget. But if you're creating something which is going to change, especially when it's dependent on user interaction, so a user taps on a button, something changes, or a user pulls in some data from the internet, something on the screen updates, then you're going to need to use a stateful widget. So let's go ahead and collapse our stateless widget, and instead let's create a stateful widget. And as you can imagine, along with stateless, there's also a shortcut for creating a new stateful widget. So the shortcut is STFUL, stateful, and if you hit enter, it creates the stateful widget for you. And there's two parts to a stateful widget. There's the widget part, which is very similar to what we had before, but there's also a state part, which will track and update the screen as the state changes. Now, when you first create the stateful widget using the shortcut, you can see that my cursor here is flashing red. And what this is telling me is that it'll insert whatever I type here into all of the places that needs to have it. So I'm going to call my stateful widget the same name as what I called my stateless widget. I'm going to call it dice page because I want my stateful widget to actually replace the stateless widget. And I'm going to expand this and I'm going to copy everything that's inside our stateless widget. So from beginning to end, everything that's inside these curly braces, basically. So starting from here, all the way going up to our left dice number. And once I cut it out of the page, all that remains is the shell of our stateless widget. And I'm going to paste that into our brand new dice state. And first, I'm going to delete the parts that I already have, which is our build method. And I'm going to paste in what we used to have from our stateless widget. And now I can delete this widget. So as you can see, we've basically just transplanted all of the code that we used to have in our stateless widget into our new dice page state. Now we've got our left dice number, and you can see this no longer triggers any sort of a warning. There's no curly underlines warning us about something being immutable, because the whole point of this state is that it can change. It is mutable. So here we create our left dice number, and let's go ahead and change our starting dice face to be 1, so that when our app starts, we actually see the first dice on the left. Now remember that when you've changed up and switched a stateless into a stateful widget, you can't just use hot reload. You actually have to use hot restart by clicking it here or here. It'll do the same thing. So now we've got the first dice showing up on the left. We can start to change the state of our left dice number. So instead of printing left button got pressed, I'm going to set the left dice number to equal a new value. Let's make it equal to 5, let's say. When the flat button gets pressed, the press is detected, and then we update the left dice number to 5, and this should automatically update. Now there's just one last thing we need to do. In addition to updating the left dice number, we actually need to specifically specify that we're updating the state by calling a method called setState. And inside setState is where we need the left dice number, or the thing that will change something that's being displayed. And this is because when our left dice number updates, we want to call build again, so that it'll build our user interface and look to see where that change has affected, namely this line right here, and rebuild it and redraw it onto the screen. So if I go ahead and hit save right now, you can see that when I click on this button, that image updates to the 5th dice. But if I didn't mark this particular variable as having the potential to change our user interface, then even though the left dice number, the variable, will update, so let's print dice number equals, and then we'll use our string interpolation to put our left dice number in here, and let's change that from 5 to 3 this time. So let me hit save, and I'll show you the console. Now, when I click on the button here, my flat button is going to be triggered, my on press is going to be called, and my left dice number gets set from what it currently is, which is 5, to 3. But this image won't update because I haven't called set state. But we can see that the variable has updated because we can see it in the console. Now, if I go ahead and click on hot reload to call our build function again so that it looks to see what has updated in here since the last time it was run, then it will update that image to 3. So when we have the set state method being called, it will basically trigger a rebuild. So it will look within these curly braces of the build method and see what has changed. Well, the only thing that has changed is our images should no longer be displaying the previous dice based on the previous left dice number, and now it should update. So when we call set state and we update a value, it will see where it needs to update and it will do so accordingly. Now, when we change that to a 6 and we hit save, as soon as I click the button, our dice updates. Now, it all seems a little bit mysterious how that works. So I want to quickly explain it using 4 puppies. So here we have 4 puppies. One of them, as you can see, went outside and got really dirty. So it's a dirty puppy. And what set state does is that it will mark certain things as dirty. So in the case of our code, when we call set state and we update our left dice number, it will mark all of the places where it's being used as dirty. And that means that when we call build again and everything inside here gets reevaluated, it'll find the things that are marked dirty and it will redraw it, namely pull out the second dice. So if this was our current app structure, then as soon as I click on the flat button, it tells the app that the left dice number got changed. And that means that everywhere that left dice number is used needs to be updated. And it marks it as dirty. And then it redraws the entire screen and updates the dice to the new value, be it dice2.png or dice5.png, whatever we set the left dice number to. So the important concept here to grasp is that when we want to update something on screen, we will give it something that can change, namely a variable, right? Something that can vary. And then we'll change the variable inside a set state triggered by some sort of user action. In this case, when I click on the button, I want to update the left dice number to 2. Then I call set state, which looks inside the entire curly braces of my build method to see where is that used, and it finds this line right here. So it sees that the image depends on this left dice number, so this gets marked as dirty and it needs to be cleaned or it needs to be updated in this case. Then it redraws this entire image, so the effect is I click on this and the image updates almost instantaneously. Now, all we have to do is figure out how we can stop manually setting the left dice number and actually get the computer to generate a random one for us. In the next lesson, we're going to learn how we can use the Dart math library to update our left dice number by generating a random number. For all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson.